She was just a maid, but when she discovered a billionaire's darkest secret, she did the unthinkable. She stole his fortune to save his dying daughter, and her bold move shocked everyone. Do you want to know the truth? Then let's begin. Maya had always considered herself an ordinary maid, one of countless faces quietly moving through the sprawling halls of billionaire Jonathan Clark's mansion, unseen and largely unremarkable in a world that seemed to have no place for someone like her. Each day was a battle. Simple things like paying rent, buying groceries, and keeping a roof over her head required an exhausting mixture of discipline, grit, and quiet endurance. She had long since grown accustomed to the cold efficiency of her employer, the clipped tone, the dismissive glances that reminded her, day after day, that she occupied a lower rung in this vast, luxurious household. But that morning, as she moved methodically from one room to the next, polishing surfaces and dusting intricate shelves filled with rare books and artifacts, something extraordinary happened. Something that would shatter the ordinary rhythm of her life. While tidying the study, her gloved hands brushing across the polished mahogany desk, she froze. Her heart suddenly caught in her throat. Through the slightly ajar door, muffled and hurried voices floated into her ears, and in an instant, everything she had known about her place in this world seemed to pivot on a knife's edge. Jonathan Clark, the man whose orders she had followed without question, whose temper she had long learned to navigate with silent compliance, was speaking in hushed, urgent tones about his daughter, Lily, who lay at the hospital in a state so critical that the doctors themselves had admitted defeat.
Their words were precise and chilling. Only an experimental treatment abroad, impossibly expensive and beyond the reach of almost anyone, could save her. And even then, the chances were slim. Maya's chest constricted, her breath catching as she absorbed the severity of the news. She had often felt Jonathan's indifference, his cold, calculated cruelty when he reprimanded her for minor mistakes, his impatience when she faltered under pressure. Yet now, confronted with the vulnerability of his daughter, a small, fragile child who had done nothing to deserve suffering, Maya felt something she could not ignore, a fierce, urgent compassion that seemed to rise from some hidden depth inside her. She glanced around the study, eyes darting from the stacks of papers to the massive safe tucked in the corner, and then to the piles of cash that gleamed in the morning light, untouched and abundant, a stark reminder of the inequality that defined her existence. She had no money of her own, no influence, and certainly no authority to interfere in the private, perilous affairs of the family she served. The thought of Lily's life hanging by a thread, however, ignited a daring spark within her, one that left her trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. She imagined the little girl's face, pale and wan, lying in the sterile, humming hospital room, machines beeping in a rhythm that echoed the fragility of life itself, and she could not turn away.
A dangerous idea, one she had never before entertained, began to take shape with startling clarity. "If I don't do something, who will?" she whispered under her breath, the words barely audible but heavy with determination. Her fingers, which had so often been steady in service of tasks mundane and controlled, now shook slightly as she contemplated the enormity of what she was considering. She knew the risks, of course. She knew that taking what did not belong to her was theft, punishable by law, punishable by consequences far beyond her imagining. But for a moment, those thoughts were eclipsed by the more pressing urgency of the situation, the life of a child who depended entirely on the actions of others. In that silent, tension-filled study, as the sun streamed through the tall windows and illuminated the opulent yet cold surroundings, Maya made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. She would take enough to save the girl, nothing more, guided solely by necessity and the singular moral compass of compassion. Every instinct in her, from the caution that had long kept her in her modest, controlled place, to the lingering fear of reprisal, seemed to stand in stark contrast to the courage surging through her chest. Yet she felt certain, as certainty can sometimes arrive in moments of crisis, that she could not remain idle, could not continue in silent complicity while a young life slipped toward the darkness of inevitability. The piles of cash, the safe, the entire weight of wealth and power surrounding her were no longer symbols of control. They were now a lifeline, a chance to act when the world itself seemed paralyzed by impossibility. Maya's hands continued to tremble as she whispered to herself, steadying her racing heart, affirming the single truth that had crystallized in that suspended moment. She would act, and she would act with purpose, guided only by the desperate, urgent need to give Lily a chance at life.
That night, the mansion was eerily silent, every corner wrapped in shadow, every hallway echoing only the soft creak of floorboards beneath Maya's careful steps. The grandeur of Jonathan Clark's home, which had always felt intimidating, now seemed almost surreal, a cathedral of wealth and power, yet utterly empty, as if holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Maya moved with painstaking caution, her heart hammering in her chest, each beat loud and insistent in her ears, reminding her of the stakes she had voluntarily taken upon herself. Every step was measured, deliberate, and silent. She had learned to navigate the mansion's labyrinthine halls over months of service, memorizing the placement of furniture, the pattern of security cameras, and the occasional patrol of the household staff. Tonight, however, every familiar turn, every familiar shadow carried a heightened tension, a sense of anticipation that made her palms sweat even beneath the thin gloves she wore. Reaching the study felt like approaching the eye of a storm, a moment of stillness before an irreversible action. She paused at the door, inhaled sharply, and steeled herself against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The safe loomed before her, a formidable, cold metal reminder of the risk she was about to take. Yet it also represented the lifeline she so desperately needed to grasp. Hands trembling, she entered the combination she had memorized earlier, the tumblers clicking in sequence, each sound echoing ominously through the silent room. When the door of the safe swung open, the stacks of bills inside seemed impossibly high, almost taunting in their abundance. Yet they were the only means to save Lily's life. Maya's mind raced, a torrent of thoughts colliding with the precision of her mission. Every note she counted, every stack she shifted was a deliberate act, a gamble with fate itself. This wasn't mere theft. This was a calculated risk, a collision of morality and necessity, of desperation and courage, and she felt the weight of that collision in every nerve of her body. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, yet reality carried a sharper edge than fantasy ever could. She pushed thoughts of consequences aside, blocking out the possibility of discovery, arrest, or punishment, and instead centered her attention on the one image that had driven her here. Lily, fragile and unconscious in a sterile hospital room, connected to machines that beeped with mechanical regularity, her life hanging by a thread.
The urgency she had overheard earlier, Jonathan's voice taut with fear, the doctor's words laced with hopelessness, all replayed in her mind like a haunting echo, reinforcing the gravity of her choice. Time seemed to stretch and warp, the seconds elongating into what felt like hours as she meticulously counted the exact sum needed for the treatment abroad. Each note she slid into the folds of her coat was both a victory and a reminder of the enormity of the act she was committing. When the final bill was secured, Maya paused for a fraction of a second, letting the weight of her decision settle in her chest before she moved, leaving no trace behind. The mansion's silence welcomed her escape, every step outward carrying her closer to freedom and closer to the life she was risking everything to save. She navigated the halls with a heightened awareness, listening for the faintest sound, adjusting her pace to match the rhythm of the house, until finally she reached the exit, where the cool night air greeted her like a breath of hope. The journey to the airport was tense and surreal. Each street lamp passed, each quiet car on the empty roads seemed to mark the passage from fear to resolve. Her mind replayed the desperate tones of Jonathan's voice, the pleading urgency of the doctors, and for the first time, a fierce, almost intoxicating clarity took hold. She was alive, truly alive, driven not by fear of punishment, but by the pure, unyielding force of compassion. Maya's hands, though still trembling, felt steadier now. Her pulse synced with the singular purpose that had carried her this far, a purpose that would guide her until she had delivered the means to save Lily, the little girl whose life now depended entirely on her courage and audacity. Every mile closer to the airport intensified her awareness of the stakes. Yet with each breath she felt a growing, exhilarating sense of agency, of moral victory, and the quiet, undeniable knowledge that sometimes the boldest acts are born not from recklessness, but from the unwavering determination to do what is right, no matter the cost.
By dawn, the news hit Jonathan like a thunderclap. Money had gone missing from his safe, the very fortune that had always represented his power, control, and unyielding authority over every aspect of his life. Rage consumed him immediately, a fire that surged through his veins, sharp and unrelenting. Yet even in the intensity of his fury, the thought of his daughter, Lily, remained at the forefront of his mind, a piercing, inescapable concern that eclipsed everything else. Every instinct he had honed over decades of business battles and personal dominance told him to strike, to punish, to demand justice. But beneath that instinct lurked a deeper, primal fear. What if his child's life was at stake? He called the police, his voice taut, urgent, commanding them to search, to investigate, to leave no stone unturned. Officers arrived, moving swiftly, questioning staff, reviewing security tapes, retracing steps, yet Maya had already vanished, as if the night itself had swallowed her whole.
Meanwhile, in a quiet, distant hospital thousands of miles away, Lily's treatment began under the careful supervision of skilled doctors, the hum of machines punctuating each moment with mechanical precision. Maya, hidden from view, watched from the shadows, her eyes never leaving the room where the girl she had risked everything to save lay vulnerable and fragile. Every heartbeat echoed in Maya's chest, a reminder of the stakes, of the life she had chosen to protect at enormous personal risk. She knew that if she were discovered, consequences could be severe: arrest, imprisonment, the ruin of her reputation. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Her focus was absolute, her attention honed entirely on the fragile life she had placed above her own security, on the success of the treatment that could turn the tide between life and death. As Jonathan raged thousands of miles away, he could not yet comprehend the full picture, but an unsettling curiosity began to gnaw at him, a small, persistent whisper that suggested something was different, something unexpected about the situation.
He began to think beyond the immediate theft, digging into the patterns of Maya's behavior, reviewing the countless little moments he had dismissed over the years, her quiet acts of care toward his daughter, the patience she had shown when he himself had been impatient, the sacrifices she had made that no one had acknowledged. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the anger that had ignited at the news of the stolen money began to shift, replaced by a creeping disbelief that unsettled him far more than the theft ever could. Could it be possible, he wondered, that this act, so bold, so reckless, so unthinkable, had not been motivated by greed, by a desire for wealth or power, but by something entirely different? Compassion, perhaps? A selfless, urgent, and almost incomprehensible drive to save a life in danger had led Maya to act in this way, and the thought both confused and intrigued him. Jonathan's mind replayed memories he had long buried, moments when Maya had gone unnoticed, yet had consistently demonstrated a level of dedication, kindness, and courage that far surpassed her role as a servant in his household. Every reprimand he had issued, every harsh word, every cold glance, now felt dwarfed by the enormity of her actions, and a quiet, uneasy realization began to take root. He had misjudged her. severely underestimated her heart and perhaps misunderstood the very meaning of courage and loyalty. As the hours stretched on, the police continued their search, but Jonathan found himself drifting, unable to focus solely on the mechanics of investigation, his thoughts consumed by the anomaly of Maya's character, the audacity of her choice, and the moral complexity of what had occurred. In the distance, Lily's treatment progressed, and Jonathan, despite his mounting anxiety and lingering rage, could not shake the growing awareness that he was witnessing something extraordinary, not a crime of opportunity, but a profound act of humanity carried out in secrecy, motivated by love and moral urgency, and one that challenged everything he had believed about the people around him. He questioned himself, his assumptions, his judgments, and gradually the searing heat of anger softened into a bewildered, reluctant respect. Could it really be that compassion, not avarice, had driven the daring theft? Could the very person he had often overlooked, dismissed, and treated with indifference possess a depth of courage, morality, and selflessness that he had never imagined? The notion unsettled him, and yet deep down he knew that unraveling this mystery was only the beginning, that understanding Maya, her motivations, and the quiet heroism she had displayed would change not only the course of his daughter's life, but potentially the very way he viewed the world, power, and the people who existed within it.
Weeks later, after days of relentless searching, endless phone calls, and countless leads that seemed to evaporate into thin air, Jonathan finally tracked Maya down, his mind a storm of fury, disbelief, and an underlying tension that refused to release him. When he arrived at the modest location where she had been hiding, he found her standing calmly, composed, hands empty, and her posture radiating a quiet confidence that somehow made the tension in the air even more pronounced. The sight of her, so unassuming yet resolute, struck him with an unexpected force, but the fire of his anger remained undiminished. "You stole from me!" he roared, his voice echoing through the small room, eyes blazing with fury, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring ready to strike. The words burst from him, fueled by betrayal, shock, and the residual adrenaline from the chase. Yet beneath the rage, there lingered a complicated knot of worry and concern, an inescapable awareness that his daughter's life had been placed at the mercy of this one woman's choices. Maya, however, met his outburst with unshakable composure. Her voice, calm yet firm, carried a weight that matched the conviction in her eyes. "I did what had to be done," she said, each word deliberate, steady, and unwavering. "Your daughter needed help. I saved her." The words hung in the air, resonating in the space between them, demanding to be considered, forcing Jonathan to confront a reality he had not anticipated. He froze, a flash of doubt crossing his features, a momentary pause in the torrent of emotion that had carried him here. He looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time he saw beyond the surface, beyond the uniform she wore, beyond the position she occupied in his household. He saw the courage, the unwavering moral clarity, the fearless determination that had driven her actions. Every harsh word he had ever spoken to her, every dismissive glance, every act of cruelty he had delivered without thought, now paled in comparison to the depth of character she had displayed in that night of reckoning. The realization struck him with a force more powerful than any reprimand, more jarring than any shock he had ever encountered in his high-stakes life of business and power. The mansion, the sprawling fortress of wealth and control he had once ruled with absolute authority, seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves recognized the shift in dominance. One not dictated by money, legal power, or influence, but by the force of heart, courage, and unselfish love. He became acutely aware, in a way he had never been before, that Maya had outmaneuvered him entirely,
not with cunning or subterfuge in the conventional sense, but with the purity of her intentions, the clarity of her conscience, and the unshakable commitment to save a life more precious than any fortune he possessed. Time appeared to slow in that charged moment, each second stretching as Jonathan processed the enormity of what had transpired, the audacity of the act, and the impossible moral weight it carried. He felt the ground beneath his assumptions shift, the framework of his judgments wobble as the truth became undeniable. He had been bested, not through law, not through coercion, not through threat or intimidation, but through the undeniable power of human compassion, decisiveness, and courage. The room seemed to pulse with the silent acknowledgement of this realization. Every shadow, every beam of light, every familiar object in the mansion now imbued with a new significance, a witness to the profound human drama that had unfolded within and beyond its walls. Jonathan's chest rose and fell, slower now, heavier with contemplation, as he considered the implications of the confrontation. In that singular moment, he recognized the transformation that had occurred, both in the events of the night that had led to this confrontation and within himself, as the rigid boundaries of authority and power gave way to the undeniable truth that sometimes the measure of a person's strength is found not in wealth, status, or influence, but in the depth of courage, the clarity of conscience, and the willingness to act selflessly when it matters most. He remained standing, stunned, aware that the encounter would leave a permanent imprint, reshaping his understanding of control, morality, and what it truly means to lead. In the end, Jonathan did something that no one could have predicted, something that defied every expectation anyone might have had about his character, his sense of justice, and the rigid rules he had lived by for decades. Instead of pressing charges, instead of exacting punishment or demanding restitution, he stepped forward and embraced Maya, his arms tentative at first, then firmer as the enormity of the moment pressed upon him, tears glistening in his eyes and threatening to spill freely. A rare vulnerability that startled even him, because in that instant, the carefully constructed walls of authority and control he had built around himself for so long were beginning to crumble. "I was wrong. About everything," he admitted, his voice breaking, the words heavy with the weight of reflection, self-reproach, and a dawning humility that had taken years of experience to cultivate, yet arrived in a single, shocking moment. "You didn't steal my fortune. You gave my daughter a chance at life I couldn't provide myself." The realization struck him like a revelation, cutting through years of pride, entitlement, and assumptions about power and money, leaving only the pure, undeniable truth that wealth alone is meaningless without the courage, morality, and humanity to use it for the good of others. Maya, standing in the embrace of the very man she had defied, felt a wave of relief wash over her, mingled with a deep sense of humility. She smiled, a smile that was quiet yet radiant, reflecting both the enormous strain of the past weeks and the unspoken satisfaction of having acted with integrity and compassion, of having risked everything to save a life that was precious beyond measure. In the same room, Lily, fragile but recovering, her cheeks flushed with color, her eyes bright with the innocence and hope that had seemed so distant only days before, held Maya's hand tightly, gripping it as though she could anchor herself to the courage and love that had arrived at her side just in time, completely unaware of the storm, the tension, the moral audacity that had passed around her, and yet fully benefiting from the consequences of bravery she could not even comprehend. Jonathan, witnessing the bond between the two, felt a shift within himself, a quiet but profound change in the way he perceived not only his daughter and Maya, but the entire world of human relationships, responsibilities, and the real value of life beyond financial calculations. He promised, aloud, and with solemn intent, to change, not merely in small, superficial ways, but in the very core of how he approached life, wealth, and the people around him, vowing to cherish, respect, and acknowledge those whose humanity he had long overlooked, whose sacrifices he had taken for granted, and whose courage he had underestimated. Maya returned to her life after that day, stepping back into the rhythm of her ordinary existence, yet she was no longer the same. She was enriched not by money, but by something far more enduring: respect from those who had once doubted her, love from those whose lives she had touched, and a profound sense of courage that would remain with her forever, a quiet power that comes from having acted decisively when it mattered most. Her bold move had stunned everyone who had known her, from the highest ranks of Jonathan's household staff to the distant circles of social acquaintances who would later hear whispers of the incredible events. Yet, beyond the shock, beyond the astonishment and the whispered judgments, there was a deeper, more resonant impact. She had saved a life, changed the course of a young girl's future, and reshaped the heart of a man who had long believed himself immune to lessons of empathy and moral clarity. As she continued her life, Maya understood that her actions had created ripples far beyond her immediate vision, ripples that would touch not only Jonathan and Lily, but also the people around them, illustrating that sometimes the most courageous acts are those taken quietly, without expectation of recognition, and that the truest measure of success is found not in wealth or position, but in the lives we touch and the hearts we change. Every day after, as she went about her work, she carried with her the memory of that night, the knowledge that she had done what few would dare, and the quiet, unshakable assurance that integrity, compassion, and courage are forces more powerful than any fortune, more enduring than any fear, and more transformative than any act of law or authority. Her story, though shocking in its boldness, would endure because of the lives it saved and the hearts it changed, leaving a legacy of bravery, humanity, and redemption that would resonate far beyond the walls of the mansion and the hospital where it all began.